Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. So Joe Rogan, everyone knows Joe Rogan. He was on the Tim Kennedy podcast. Tim Kennedy's former Army Ranger and MMA fighter right now. And this is what Tim Kennedy wrote on the Twitter. He said, on my podcast with Rogan, he offered to moderate a debate between Joe Biden and Trump. It'd be 4 hours, no live audience, just the two candidates, camera, and their vision how to move the country forward. Who wants this? Now, normally would not have ever talked about it, but Trump retweeted it and wrote, I do. Kennedy wrote back, long-form debate with a neutral moderator, no fake audience reactions, no biased questions, neutral camera positions, no sound bite length responses, just their respective policies explained to us. Let's make it happen. Debates are the worst. They're the worst. I hate them. I get very frustrated at them. I don't know what's more frustrating to watch, debates or congressional hearings. But they're very similar. They're very similar in the fact that they should be important. They could be important. But they just end up being this meaningless, made-for-TV show. And I get so frustrated because I just think, like, who decided that we should do debates this way? Why do we do it this way? And I think the only reason we do it this way is because we've always done it this way. And I don't know when the first debate was where it was like, oh, you get 60 seconds to answer, and then a bell rings, and you got to shut up, and then you get 30-second rebuttal, and then we move on. Like, what is that? It's total garbage. It's all rehearsed talking points, and then we just see who gets the best jab in. I hate them. We need a 4-hour discussion. We need to totally change the format. The Lincoln Douglas debates were 3 hours long. It was the first candidate gets, and they would switch every time they did one who went first. But so Lincoln would get 60 minutes, and then Douglas would get 90 minutes, and then Lincoln would get a 30-minute rebuttal to the 90, which you obviously couldn't rehearse because it was based off of what the 90-minute person said in response, right? So when did we go from 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 30 minutes to 60 seconds, 30 seconds, that's it? A terrible idea. We got to totally blow that up and start from scratch. And I think we got to move into the age of podcasting, really. Podcasting is so great because it totally changes everything. It's where you just sit down. You talk. And I think the debate needs that. We don't need big flowery speeches. First of all, no one today can give a speech like Lincoln and Douglas could. Right? There were no teleprompters back then. So we don't need any big flowery stuff. And we certainly don't need pre-rehearsed debate quips. Just sit down and talk. Have a conversation. Debate quips like, what was the Hillary one? Oh, yeah. Donald Trump here has an economic policy. I like to call it trumped up economics. Like, what is that garbage? Stop with that. Thing is, Biden will never do it. He can't stand a 4-hour debate. He couldn't do it. So, what's the left going to do? Because Trump's going to hopefully keep pressing this. So they're going to do two things. First, they're going to try to attack Joe Rogan, right? Try to undermine the entire effort completely. But Joe Rogan's pretty universally respected, so they're not really going to be able to do that. Or they're going to do, the Biden campaign's going to do this super lame, we decided that we are going to follow through with the previous negotiated presidential debate commission format. And honestly, it's President Trump, who's scared to speak to the American people about his record, blah, 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 blah. Some stupid spin like that. So this is a Trump needs to just push this nonstop. He needs to talk about it every single day and make Slow Joe the person who's scared to actually sit down and debate. And it's a classic Trump double bind. If Biden doesn't do the Rogan debate, he'll look awful. Or excuse me, if he does do it, he'll look awful in it. And if he doesn't do it, he'll look scared. And Trump needs to drive it home every single day. I want to talk about our special coming up on Friday. We're doing a special. It's called The Left's Hoax Machine. So the plan is, we'll see how it goes, but the plan is the first segment, we're going to do a quick run through of 4 years of hoaxes against Trump. Scott Adams just the other day, he tweeted out, have all the Kurds, anyone checked on the Kurds lately? Have all the Kurds been killed? Because that's what we told would happen when Trump pulled troops out of that portion of Iraq. And I don't know what's happened to the Kurds. I would look it up, but net neutrality ended the internet. There's no more internet because of net neutrality, remember? that whole thing. Right, so we're gonna do a quick reminder, 4 years worth of these things. That alone could take the whole hour, so we're gonna have to go real fast on that. That'll be the first segment. Then we're gonna talk about the psychology behind it, right? Why do people believe hoaxes? So we'll talk about confirmation bias. That's the main thing in play. And then finally, we're gonna talk with Jim Hansen. He's a former Army Ranger, just like Tim Kennedy. And I wanna talk about Russia and China's role in hoaxes and what's coming for the election, but mostly big tech's role and the social media company in Silicon Valley's role in all this. And his point is, I don't know, we'll let him speak for himself here, obviously, but on Friday, but his point is that big tech is order of magnitudes more damaging than Russia or China could ever imagine being in the run-up and the aftermath of our election. And I bring that up here because big media, you have big tech, big media, right? Big media, like big networks, they don't want to change the debate formats. There's tons of money. Can you imagine what the ratings are going to be for the first debate? And the commercials are going to sell for millions and millions of dollars. So huge ratings, tons of money. They're never going to let Joe Rogan take over the debate, right? So the media companies don't want that, and the big tech companies want to keep total control over you and over the entire narrative. So here's my prediction for what's going to happen on the election. Election night, Trump's going to win, but the media companies, they're going to keep saying, no, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. We got to count all the votes. Haven't counted all the votes yet. We're not sure. We don't know. We don't know. The social media companies, Zuckerberg's already said that they will prevent any account from spreading false information about election results, which means if Trump says on election night, hey, everyone, congratulations, we won Florida, Twitter, Facebook, they're all going to take it down. They're going to take it down. We played the clip the other day of Zuckerberg saying that, and they're going to do it in the name of preventing civil unrest. They've already done it. They've already done this. Last month or so, the social media companies, they took down a Trump tweet because it was about something about the spread of COVID in kids or something like that. And they took it down. They deleted a tweet from the president of the United States. A couple weeks ago, they removed a video from that group of doctors. Remember that? And you can think that these doctors are kooks or not or whatever, but it's pretty scary that the social media companies and the big tech companies can just make it disappear. It's just gone, like it never even happened. And just the other day, same thing, Google and all the rest, they took down an interview with a Stanford doctor. He's at the Hoover Institute now, which is at Stanford, and he's now on Trump's COVID team. And they took down an interview with him because he did not speak the big tech party line about COVID. He disagreed with the WHO. Whatever this guy said, Scott Atlas is his name, he disagreed with or he contradicted the World Health Organization's medical information. That was the official line. Really, the same WHO that's completely beholden to China and has been wrong about almost everything related to this, and the things that they were right about months after it was obvious to the whole world. That's the WHO that we're still relying on as the great authority when it comes to COVID. So I just want to play a clip here from that video that was taken down off of YouTube and just give you a taste of the type of thing that's so bad that YouTube can't even allow it on the platform. So here's Dr. Scott Atlas.
This is why we should open the schools, because there is virtually zero risk of death and virtually zero risk of a serious illness in children. This is the fact. This is inarguable. This is proven not only every country outside the United States, but by our own data in the CDC itself. Of the first 100,000+ deaths analyzed, 99.98 deaths were not in children. And in fact, 99.9%, I'm talking about percent, 99.9% of deaths are in people over 24. Now, K through 12, of course, are young children. There's another big point here. All over the world, Switzerland, Iceland, Australia, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Asian countries, there is a minimal, if any, risk of children transmitting the disease, even to their parents. It's not just that children are not at risk at all from this disease. They also do not even transmit the disease.
The host, Peter Robinson, he said, so what about the teachers? Would they not be at risk either? And Atlas said, well, there's not a significant risk, but I want to qualify that. He says, teachers in K through 12, half of them are 41 years old or younger. 82% are under 55. And the risk from COVID-19 for people under 60 is less than or equal to seasonal flu. So if you're going to shut down the schools because you're worried about the rare teacher who's in a high-risk category, you must necessarily close the schools from November through April because they're the same risk in flu season. And then goes on and says that if you're an older teacher or you have other issues, then you should take the proper precautions and whatever, right? So listen, if you want to address the points about kids spreading and the rate of infection and all this other stuff, that's fine, address it, right? But to delete it entirely because it goes against WHO guidelines or whatever, WHO who's been wrong constantly, that's a major problem. And I bring these two things up, you may be like, Slater, I'm confused, like you jump from one to the other. I hope the parallel to the election is very clear here. All right, big technology, Google, something like 98% of all searches are in Google, YouTube, same thing. They're the gatekeeper to everything on the internet. And they can eliminate any information they want. And it's controlled by people in Silicon Valley, people who are very far left, they have complete control over the dissemination of information. I don't know how else to put that. People in San Francisco have complete control over the dissemination of information. People in San Francisco who have very different worldviews than you do. And all of this COVID silencing, which we've seen a few times now, I just highlighted 3, that group of doctors a couple weeks ago, Scott Atlas, and the president's tweet himself, right? This is all just trial run for what's gonna happen with the election. They've done it a few times already. They justify it as public health. They're gonna use the same justification for silencing people the day of the election and afterwards. They're gonna call it a public health emergency, the safety of the people, to prevent civil unrest, it's all the same thing. And most people won't even know that it's happening. They won't even know that the big tech companies are even doing it. We'll obviously talk much more about that in the weeks to come. I want to come back with a segment. I was wrong about something the other day, and I want to correct the record. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we have a kids warning for this segment. If you have any kids nearby or within earshot, then this segment is not for their listening pleasure, not appropriate for kiddos. All right, so I gotta be honest here about something. I did a segment on the radio yesterday, and I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. I misunderstood something, and there's more nuance here than I wanted there to be. And it's a lot to break down, and I'm not even sure if it's worth it. I think it's worth it, but I don't know how to do it, and it's super confusing, but I think I want to give it a shot here. So let's try, and hopefully this makes sense. And I think the best way to walk through it is to walk through what my thought process was, and then add the nuance afterwards, and then we can come to our working conclusion on it. Does that make sense? All right, so here's my original thoughts. California passed, and this has been signed. So this is the new law that says if a 27-year-old has sex with a 17-year-old, so 27 has sex with someone who's 10 years younger, they're a minor, they're 17, or if a 24-year-old has sex with a 14-year-old, 10 years younger, then the adult is not automatically added to the sex offender registry list. Not automatically. It'll now be up to the judge's discretion. And I'm sure there's going to be many sympathetic judges who will not add that adult to the child molesters list, right? And we talked the other day about that New York Times article. It was about a 24-year-old who met a 13-year-old girl online and drove to her house and was sure to stop for some condoms on the way. And then it turned out to be a sting. And the whole New York Times article was about how the 24-year-old's the real victim here. All right, so you're definitely going to have some judges who, I got this hair in my eye or something. Sorry. You're definitely going to have this, some judges who are sympathetic to the real victim, the 24-year-old, and not put him on the sex registry list. Okay, so that's what the law said. Back it up a bit. Kevin Faulconer is the mayor of San Diego. He's the highest ranking Republican in California, and he's the highest, or the how do I word this? Like really the only Republican mayor of any city in the country, of any big city in the country. San Diego is like the 7th biggest city in the country or something like that. So Mayor Faulkner, I should let you know about him too. He never takes a stance on anything ever, all right? Ever, on anything, okay? He's the most squishy, he's like, anyway, it's a whole long story. I live in San Diego, so anyway. The fact that he took a stance on something, it's like the first time I've ever seen him take a stance on anything, shows me that he's gonna run for governor of California. So Kevin Faulkner is a name that you're going to hear again in the future. Anyway, he wrote this. He said, as a parent, I'm appalled that last night our governor signed a law maintaining a 24-year-old can have sex with a 14-year-old and it not be considered predatory. An adult who commits any sex act on a minor 10 years younger must be registered as a sex offender. Law must be changed. Okay. So the law was written by State Senator Weiner. Not kidding. He wrote the bill. He wrote back. He said, Mr. Mayor, I'd always been under the impression that you were a supporter of the LGBT community. This bill does nothing more than treat LGBTQ youth the same way we've treated straight young people since 1944. Why would you oppose simple equality? And I read that, I was like, equality? What are you talking about? Equality. So I did some research on that, and here's the deal. Here's the nuance. You ready for the nuance? Okay. Apparently, in California, again, kids warning here, it is currently the law that a 24-year-old could have, let's say that a 24-year-old man could have sex with a 14-year-old girl vaginally, and then it is up to the judge's discretion if that adult is put on sex registry. That's already the law in California. This law makes that also the case for anal or oral sex as well. That's where the gay part comes in here. So, the example that the senator gives is, let's say there's a 19-year-old man who has sex with his 17-year-old girlfriend. The judge has always had discretion to say, oh, they were dating, the 19-year-old doesn't need to be on the sex registry list. The judge has always had that discretion. But, Senator Weiner says, if a 19-year-old man has sex with a 17-year-old boy, a minor, then the judge must put that 19-year-old on the sex registry list. And that's where the inequality, because he's gay, comes from compared to straight people. Does that make sense? So now, because this new law also includes anal sex, the judge has the same discretion that he has always had with the straight couple who had vaginal sex. All right? Got it? So it's not what others and I sort of thought it said, which was, California made it legal to have sex with 14-year-olds. I think it's not, there's more nuance to it than that. Okay. So, what do we do with this? Not entirely sure. Here's the best I got. I think my issue is a 10-year age gap is quite a range. Now, of course, the example that the senator gave is a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, right? A 2-year age gap where the minor is only months away from being 18, right? So they give the most benign example possible. But the law has a range that's as wide and as young as a 24-year-old having sex with a 14-year-old. That's 10 years, not 2 years, it's 10 years. And it's not a 17-year-old who's almost 18. It's a 14-year-old, that's a kid. And that's too much for me. That's where I would have a problem. If you want to write the law that's maybe even 19 to 17-year-old, we could talk about that. But 24 to 14, no. So that's the first thing. Second thing, and the reason I get so frustrated with this, and I catch myself, I can't think of any examples right now, but there's certain things, stories like this, and I get frustrated by it. I'm like, I can't figure out why. And it's like, it's because our culture is so screwed up. And I'm trying to find a legislative answer to something that there is no legislative answer, right? Where I'm trying to find a legislative answer to something that is a cultural issue. This is what happens. And these are the conversations that we have to have because we live in a broken culture. Because it's difficult to legislate morality. Now, we do it all the time. right? You'll hear people say, oh, you can't legislate morality. We're going to talk with Abby Johnson coming up at the end of the show about abortion. She's an amazing pro-life speaker. She spoke at the Republican convention. So people say this about abortion all the time. They're like, oh, you can't legislate morality. Of course you can. We do. You can't murder someone. That's morality. We've legislated it. It is immoral to murder someone. That's all we do is legislate morality. When someone says, oh, you can't legislate morality, what they're really saying is, I want you to legislate based on my morality, not your morality. Right? So when they say we can't legislate on morality, they know you can. They just want it to be based on their morality. So of course we legislate on morality. It's all we do. So the problem comes in, we used to all have the same morality. That was why it worked. We used to have a shared cultural and religious conviction of lots of things, but in this case, no premarital sex. That was the cultural conviction, that it's immoral to have sex outside of marriage, which is why pretty much every state in the country had fornication laws. Fornication is having sex outside of marriage, and also laws against cheating on your spouse. We had laws against that because back in the day, we had a moral code that was against those things. So we had a moral code that was against those things, and we all shared that. So therefore, we created a legal code that reflected the moral code. Now, obviously, this has become very puritanical. As our cultural moral codes have changed, the laws are now changing to reflect that. And here we are. Sure, 24-year-old can have sex with a 14-year-old, no problem, right? Or judge's discretion, if it's okay or not. As long as it's consensual. And that's the key word I want to focus on here for the next 2 minutes I have. This is Robert George, Professor Robert George, a professor at Princeton. He wrote on Twitter, he said, liberation, they say, liberation, like sexual liberation from traditional norms of sexual morality, they said, wasn't to include or result in the sexualization of children. This was nonsense, yet many people believed it. And some continue to believe it, despite the evidence staring them in the face. For more than 50 years, we've witnessed in popular culture the sexualization of children at younger and younger ages. It's scarcely a secret. Now Netflix gives us cuties. He says, look, you can have the sexual revolution or you can have childhood innocence. You can't have both. If you want the sexual revolution, know that the sexualization of children comes with the package. It's part of the deal. Its impact of the sexual revolution won't be confined to consenting adults. The claim that children can be shielded from its ravages was a fairy tale. So, our moral code used to say that you can have sex when you're married. Right? Then we loosened up, man, and we had the sexual revolution, and then it became, well, sex is great and all that, as long as it's between consenting what? Consenting adults. And now, it's anyone consenting, even if you're 14, having sex with a 24-year-old. Even if you're 14, clearly not an adult. So do you see the digression, right? So it's only sex in marriage, then it became, well, any consenting adults. And it's none of your business, right? None of your business to either have a moral opinion or to certainly legislate sex between consenting adults. And now it's anyone who consents, down to 14 even. Do you think it's going to stop there? As long as they can consent. So that's the digression, and it's going to keep going. I hope that's kind of clear. I know that's like not as satisfying of a segment as like, can you believe what California's doing? But I still think there's a little bit of, can you believe where we're headed? Because we're headed certainly in a very certain direction. And it's based on a moral code, all right. Not a puritanical one, not a religious one, quite the opposite. And as a nation, we reap what we sow. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, coming up next, we're going to talk to the great Abby Johnson. We'll explain that in just a minute if you're not familiar with her. She's amazing. This is E.J. Dixon. She's a writer, a culture writer at Rolling Stone. She said, I wrote about Cuties, the movie, The history of the right's obsession with pedophilia and how it actively harms survivors of child sex abuse. This is a beautiful example of gaslighting. All right, it's like, no, I'm not obsessed with pedophilia. You are. Right? I'm concerned with your normalizing of it. Don't try to gaslight me into thinking I'm the one who's obsessed with it. I'm concerned about it. You're the one obsessed with it. Now, this is a little bit of a separate conversation from what we just did with the California law about the sexual, right? But it's in the same world. Now, she's referring to that Cuties movie, the Netflix movie. But that's just one example of the sexualizing of kids. I live in San Diego. We go to the beach all the time. And there are thongs everywhere on little girls. And I want to punch their dads in the face whenever I see it. But there's never any dads to be seen, which may have something to do with it. There is without a doubt a sexualizing of kids going on. That's never been done before. So I got a couple minutes here. I want to leave time for Abby Johnson, but buckle up here for some pretty sick stuff. I think this is really important to know where all this came from. Alfred Kinsey, he's the guy behind it all. He wrote a book in 1948 called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. 1953, he wrote Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. His claim is, and I'm putting this very generously, that men and women should no longer resist their animalistic sexual urges. He was a zoologist by trade. Before he did this whole sexual stuff, he was the world-leading expert in some sort of wasp, like one particular wasp, and then he got into all this sex stuff. And he said that we should stop following those old biblical taboos when it comes to sex and just do it all the time. And he backed it up with science, backed it up with statistics. And he found 5,000 men and almost 6,000 women to give information about their sex life. And the media lapped it all up. It was because it was about what men and women were really doing and thinking when it came into sex. Now, Kinsey said, he said, this is first and foremost a report on what people do and raises no question of what they should do or what kinds of people do it. But the truth was, the whole point of what he was doing was to normalize things, right? And have people reading this report and say, wow, way more people have sex before marriage than my oppressive parents in church made it seem. Way more people are doing it. Almost everyone's doing it. I'm actually the weirdo who's not. And then made it all seem very scientific and official. But in reality, he was a pedophile scam artist, to put it bluntly. Among the men he talked to, among his 5,200 men he talked to, there were 1,400 imprisoned sex offenders. And he admitted to talking to, in his words, several hundred male prostitutes. He asked them their sexual habits and sexual morals, and then presented it to the country as if this is what all men think and do. And if you disagree, you're not normal. Now, Playboy in 1953, that's the year they started, Playboy's, and Hugh Hefner admitted he was entirely based on Kinsey's worldview. And this is from one of the issues of Playboy, talking about how to have sex with virgins. And Playboy said, you can prove almost anything with it, meaning Kinsey's numbers. The idea is to bowl her over with the sheer mass of your statistics, all proving that simply everybody is enjoying sex this season. Losing her virginity will seem very unimportant compared to the fear of being different. So Kinsey made it seem that the only deviant sexual behavior was not having sex. Also, when he talked to married women, he defined a married woman as any woman who's lived with a man for over a year, which is a weird definition of marriage. And prostitutes were included in that sampling of married women as well. Total garbage statistics. Now, we're not going to do a full biography on Kinsey. Maybe we should. We could, but we don't have time right now. Remember we did a full biography on Karl Marx and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and those were two terrible people, like the worst. Similarly here, Kinsey might be the biggest pervert to have ever lived. He really, truly might be one of the most sexually depraved people ever. And the media loves him, and we are reaping what he has sown. One of the most in-depth biographers of his said that the beauty of Kinsey's sex research was that it allowed him to transform his voyeurism perversions into science. So he was a pedophile who did sex research on children. He did experiments with toddlers all the way to mid-teenagers Even 2-month-olds observed, and again, kids warning here, observed how a boy as young as 2 months climaxed. He did a report on a 4-year-old who had 26 climaxes in 24 hours, and you're wondering, how did this experiment take place? Well, most of his research was done from the experiences of convicted child molesters. So these rapists would tell Kinsey how many kids they raped and what it was like for them, for the kids. And they'd be, our victims enjoyed it. They loved their sexual experiences, which is what pedophiles tell themselves. And Kinsey would not admit this. He would just report this as research. One of his researchers was on the record of raping 800 children, and the youngest was 2 months old. And this was the information that was included in his book as normal. So for instance, in his book, he said that 17% of farm boys have had sex with animals. He was a big proponent of bestiality as a normal thing. 17% of farm boys had sex with animals, but his sampling wasn't very scientific. He would talk to pedophiles, and 17% of them had sex with animals. But that's a far cry from 17% of all kids who grow up on a farm have sex with animals. Right? Does that make sense? He was the guy who reduced a woman's personhood. He hated women. He hated women, period. He was the guy who reduced a woman's personhood to that of a sexual animal, and that's it, which Playboy and Cosmo, Playboy on the men's side, Cosmo on the women's side, picked up and ran with. And it worked. 1958, they did a poll on Midwestern college women. In 1958, so it was a little bit, just after Kinsey's initial research, 17% of them approved of premarital sex. And by 1975, 17 years later, it was 85%. There's never been that much of a drastic change in any public opinion, anything ever. And we reap what we've sown. This is a society that is, we've had a sexual revolution for 50 plus years now, and we are reaping it today. One of Bill Cosby's accusers was raped in the Playboy Mansion when she was 15. Kinsey's research, scientific research, led to Playboy. Playboy led to our porn culture. Our porn culture has led to the objectification of all women, and of course the sexualization of girls at a younger and younger age, and it's all called normal. Normal. From the guy Kinsey, who said that he had 3, incest, bestiality, and what's the other one? Incest, bestiality, whatever. There's a third one, are all normal behavior. Because he said all urges are normal and good. There's no taboos. His entire philosophy was that you should never prevent any sexual urges from coming to fruition. His quote was, all so-called sexual perversion falls within the range of biological normality. So he thought that people were born naturally pansexual, which means you can have sex with anything. And without these social constraints, hindering people, handcuffing people, then we would live happier lives. And that's your kid's sex ed class today, right? That's it. That's our cultural movement today. That's it. It's Kinsey. That's our culture. So when you hear the word Kinsey, there's a Kinsey Institute in Indiana University, right? Still a thing. I want you to think horrific pedophile, and if anyone needs to be canceled, it'd be Kinsey. But your kids, I guarantee you, your kid's sex ed class obviously has the ideological underpinning of Kinsey and his research. But I also guarantee you has funding, direct funding from the Kinsey Institute into your kid's sex ed. There's a direct tie there. We gotta go. I want to leave time for Abby Johnson. All the problems we have in America can be traced back to something, usually from the 50s and 60s. And this is something we're gonna talk about a lot tomorrow, and I've said it a lot today already, but it's biblical truth. It's just a truth of life. You reap what you sow. It's true for individuals. It's true as a country. We reap what we sow. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to go to someone who's played an incredibly important role in my life, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but it's an honor to talk to Abby Johnson. You go to abbyjohnson.org for everything that she's doing, but she's an incredible pro-life speaker. She's a former director of a Planned Parenthood. If you haven't seen the movie Unplanned, prepare yourself emotionally and watch it this weekend. You must watch the movie Unplanned, which is about her life. I could go on and on. She's got a new podcast called Politely Rude as well. Abby, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
And I should say, spoke at the RNC the other day, the Republican convention, which I definitely want to talk about. But first, Abby, what is on your Twitter, Abby Johnson? What is the picture up at the top? It's a for sale sign. What's going on there?
Yeah. It's my clinic that I used to run. It went up for sale. It closed August 1st of 2013. And so the day that the big for sale sign went up, I drove down and took a picture of it. It was awesome. So yeah.
That's great. How would you describe the current state of the pro-life movement in America today? Where are we at as you see it?
You know what? I feel like we're at a really hopeful spot in the pro-life movement. You know, we've got, as far as I'm concerned, the most pro-life president we've ever seen. And I believe that's objectively true. And I think that we have I believe that he will win re-election this November. And I think that when he does win re-election, I think that we have really a very good chance of overturning Roe and Doe. And probably the only chance that we'll have in my lifetime of seeing the overturning of Roe. And I mean, I think that the pro-life movement is very hopeful. I think that we're seeing tremendous gains at the state legislative gains right now. And I mean, just look at what's happening across the country, just in the pregnancy center movements. You know, we've got over 2,700 pregnancy centers across the country. And when you compare that to just 800 abortion facilities across the country, I mean, we're making significant gains and significant strides, and we're seeing miracles happen every day. You know, people choosing life, women choosing life, people being healed from past abortions, people speaking out against abortion. Just my ministry alone, and then there were none. We've had 600 people leave the abortion industry, come into the pro-life movement. We've had 7 full-time abortion doctors leave their practices of abortion, come into the pro-life movement, now defending life. So I think there's great encouragement. I think there's great hope. And I think this next election is going to be key.
I think, and listen, they're all amazing, but I think the stories that are super powerful for me are the ones who, like yours, who used to work at an abortion center, or like the doctors. What is it for the doctors who used to perform abortions that, what clicked for them, where they're like, ooh, this is wrong?
Yeah. You know, sometimes it's personal stories. Sometimes it's personal experiences. Sometimes, you know, we had, you know, one woman, she was a younger doctor. She had been, you know, performing abortions throughout medical school, because that's really where they hook them, is in medical school. You know, they're poor, you know, struggling doctors, and they can make, you know, $2,500 in a day. That's a lot of money, you know, for a struggling medical student. And so they hook them in young, with, you know, this promise of a lot of money. And then she got married and, you know, had been performing abortions, got married, and she had a miscarriage. And it was that experience then, it was that personal experience, you know, this very wanted baby in her own life, that really caused her to say, what am I doing here? And, you know, then some, it's just a little bit over time. They're asked to do, you know, different things. Maybe they've only performed abortions up till 12 weeks. And then all of a sudden they're being asked to perform abortions up to 16 weeks and then 20 weeks. And it's just a little bit over time. You know, their conscience is pricked a little bit over time. And now all of a sudden they're looking at a baby that's 24 weeks. And they're looking at this fully formed baby on a tray that they've killed. And they say, I can't do this anymore.
Tell me about this really interesting human phenomenon of desensitization, right? That you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like perhaps you experienced and these doctors have, where they, well, you know it, where you just do these things over time, and after a while, you're just, I don't know, your soul just gets hardened. How do you describe this process?
Yeah. I think it happens to all of us, right?
Sure.
So, I think, there are times in our life where we come to a crossroad, and I think it happens to everybody. And there's a right and wrong choice, and I think when you make the wrong choice, your heart becomes hardened every time, and every time you make that wrong choice, there's a little more callus that forms around your heart. And in the abortion industry, you'll it's like the first time that I walked back into the POC lab, like that you see in Unplanned. I had a choice to look at that baby and to recognize its humanity and to go, oh my gosh, this is a human person, and to walk away, but I didn't. I sort of steeled my heart there. I steeled my conscience, and I chose to dehumanize this innocent person. And my heart was hardened in that moment. And then I did it over and over and over again. And I think we all do that in a sense. And I think in a sense, um, some people in the pro-life movement, for a long time, did to the abortion worker what we accuse them of doing to the unborn child. And we dehumanize them by calling them killers and murderers and baby killers and demons and all of these things, right? And so it was easy for us to dehumanize them instead of reaching out to them with love, instead of seeing them as human persons. We dehumanized them, and so it was this big cycle of dehumanization. And so then when I came out of the industry, people were like, wait a minute, she doesn't have horns and a pitchfork and a tail, right? Like, she's a normal person. Like, she's a mom, she's a wife, she's a daughter, like, she's normal. And so that's then what I sought to do with starting And Then There Were None. I was like, wait, I want to show people these are just regular people who have been caught up in a cycle of dehumanization, both from the pro-life movement, and then they themselves have dehumanized others. And that's really what I've sought to do, and it's working.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it, love it. So on my radio and here on the TV, a couple weeks ago, we did a lot on the beginnings of the abortion movement and so it's a comedy. Sue Ellen Browder. Are you familiar with Sue Ellen Browder?
She
wrote
Love
Sex.
her. Yeah.
She's great. We talked to her. She's amazing. So we talked about the combination of the sexual revolution and the feminist movement and how they complement. And how men were in the beginning of this. It was not a woman.
Yeah.
Like, women were not for this. It was a man thing. That's amazing. So maybe you can speak to that for a second, and how men have been able to trick women that this is like a pro-woman thing. But also, in your experience, the men who are the men who have been a part of an abortion, and the shame that perhaps they feel, or whatever emotion it is, and what's your advice on how a man can take that and use it for good to help the movement instead of bury it?
So, men, what I'm finding in the past 11 years since I've been pro-life is there has been a significant need for healing resources for men who have experienced abortion. And there's sort of been a gap there, I think. The great news is that there is now something available for men who have gone through an abortion, who've experienced an abortion with a loved one, with their wife, with whoever it may be. Surrendering the Secret is a post-abortion study that is out there. They've had a study available for women for many years. They actually have a study now for men that's available. That's really a fantastic study out there that's geared just for men. They also just came out with a study for couples. So there's a lot of couples that experienced an abortion together, maybe when they were younger, and have never healed from that. They just came out with a study for couples as well. So those are two new tools that we have in the pro-life movement that are available, one for men and one for couples, that's put out by Surrendering the Secret. So I would encourage men to, for a long time, men's voices have been silenced on this issue. So you're right. It was men that really started this wave of abortion in our country. But then it was like when women sort of took over, they silenced men's voices on this issue.
Yeah.
And so a lot of men have felt like they didn't have a right to speak up, and they didn't have a right to stand up for their children, which is a lie. I mean, men absolutely, we need your voices on this issue. We need you to stand up. You have a right to stand up and defend the lives of your children. And I talk about this all the time. There are many, many times where women would come into our clinics and their boyfriends, their husbands would be sitting there. And sometimes I would ask, the man that was sitting there, I would say, well, what do you think about this? And every single time, the woman would be looking at them, waiting for their answer. And this guy would say, well, it's up to her. It's her body. And these women would be looking at them like almost with desperation in their eyes, like, please stand up and say something, right? Like, please stand up and say, we don't have to do this. But every time the man would put it back on her. And the reality is that these women want the men in their lives to stand up and protect them. But men have shirked their responsibility, for decades.
Abby, I have a million more questions, and we got to go, and I hate it. But can we talk again?
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, I'm super grateful for you, Abby, and obviously you did an amazing job at the RNC, and it was so good to see you there. I didn't know you were speaking until I was watching it. I saw it. I was like, what? That's amazing. And to know your story and where you've come, like, that's super cool. So the podcast is Politely Rude. Just go to abbyjohnson.org, and this weekend, tonight, watch Unplanned. It is absolutely required viewing, and it's the story of Abby's life. Abby, you're awesome. Keep it up.
Thanks so much.
True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.